On the night I turned 29, I learned that a birthday can split your life into a before and an after without giving you any warning at all. My mother's living room in Denver was glowing with soft yellow lights, the kind she always used for family gatherings, the kind meant to make everything look warm, even when the air was tight with old tension. I stood behind the cake she spent the afternoon frosting a tall three-tier thing covered in pale pink swirls and glittering sugar that belonged in a bakery window instead of on our aging dining table. People were crowded around me, cousins, neighbors, a few coworkers my mother insisted on inviting because she thought they made us look respectable. Everyone held up their phones as I leaned toward the candles. I remember thinking that the moment felt normal, almost peaceful. My brother Daniel stood behind me close enough that I sensed the warmth of his breath on the back of my neck, close enough that I should have felt the warning in the way the room shifted when he moved. He said he had a surprise for my 29th. He said it all week in a tone that made me uneasy, but I ignored it because that was how I had survived him my entire life. When I bent forward to blow out the candles, the room cheered. Someone clapped too loudly, and then a heavy silence fell, just long enough for me to feel the hairs on my arms rise. In that silence, Daniel lifted the cake. Not a playful lift, not a gentle nudge. He gripped the entire platter with both hands, twisted his wrist as if he were throwing a punch, and slammed the three-tier cake directly into my face with the force of someone trying to break something rather than celebrate it. The impact shocked the air from my lungs. My vision burst into white stars. Frosting filled my nose and coated my eyelashes. The sweetness hit first, then the metallic sting of blood where the edge of the cake board sliced the bridge of my nose. Before I could process any of it, the world tilted sharply and my skull cracked against the corner of the glass table beside me. A thin popping sound rang through my head like someone snapping a twig an inch from my ear. My right side went numb. My legs folded. I remember the floor rising to meet me cold and too far away. I remember the taste of sugar turning sour on my tongue. Then the laughter began. Not confused laughter, not nervous laughter, real laughter. Daniel stepped back with his phone raised and shouted for everyone to look. "Look at her! She is always so dramatic." My mother called out my name, but not with fear. Her voice carried embarrassment irritation, as if I had chosen to fall. "Olivia, get up. Stop making a scene on your birthday." The room wavered through a haze of frosting and tears. No one moved toward me. A woman I barely knew lifted her phone higher to take a picture instead of offering a hand. Someone whispered that I should laugh it off. Another muttered that I always made things about myself. I tried to push myself up, but the world kept splitting into two identical rooms that refused to merge. My head throbbed so violently that nausea rolled through my chest. I could barely hear anything on my left side. When I touched my hair, my fingers slid across a warm slickness that did not belong to buttercream. I tasted blood in the back of my throat. Daniel crouched beside me for a moment, not to help, but to grin at me with a glint in his eyes that flickered too quickly to be mistaken for humor. For one brief second, it was as if he wanted me to see something he usually kept hidden. Satisfaction. Control. Triumph. It made my stomach twist harder than the pain. I tried to stand again, gripping the edge of the table. The glass smeared with a mixture of pink frosting and red streaks. My mother hissed at me to clean myself up so the guests could enjoy the rest of the evening. She dabbed at my cheek with a napkin the way someone wipes a spill off a counter. Her hand never once stilled long enough to check if I was hurt. I forced myself upright legs, trembling vision flickering like a dying porch light. I apologized to people as I walked past them, even though I could not remember choosing the words. I apologized for bleeding. I apologized for falling. I apologized for ruining my own birthday because that was the role I learned to play. In the bathroom, I locked the door and stared at my reflection. Pink, red, white. A strange canvas of colors that did not belong on a human face. Frosting crusted along my jaw. A thin line of blood dripped from behind my ear. When I bent to wipe it, the room spun so violently I fell to my knees. I think I passed out for a moment long enough for a cold numbness to creep across my forehead. My mother knocked once and told me not to dramatize the night. "Guests are still here. Do not ruin this for everyone." I did not respond. I could not. When I finally drove home near midnight, the streetlights fractured into double halos. My right eye pulsed with each heartbeat. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking so badly that I had to sit in the car for several minutes before I could even open the door. Inside my bathroom, I washed away clumps of frosting and found blood still seeping from the small cut behind my ear. My hearing in that ear had faded into a muted hum like a distant engine. When I lay down, a pressure behind my eye swelled until it felt impossible to breathe. I told myself I would be fine by morning, that it was just a cake, just a fall, just a joke. At 3 in the morning, I woke with a jolt, unable to focus my vision. The left side of my face felt wrong, as if something inside it had shifted. My pillowcase had a faint red smear where my head had rested. As I stared at myself in the mirror, a sinking certainty formed in the pit of my stomach that nothing about tonight was normal or safe. I did not know it yet, but the injury Daniel caused was not the worst part. The X-ray the ER doctor would show me in a few hours was. I spent most of my childhood learning to survive inside a house where love always seemed to revolve around one person, and it was never me. My brother Daniel was born 3 years before I was, and from the moment I was old enough to understand the world around me, it was clear that he held a place in my mother's heart that I could never access, no matter how quietly or carefully I moved through life. He was the golden boy, the child whose smallest achievements lit up every corner of our Denver home. When he drew a crooked sun at age 5, my mother taped it to the refrigerator with pride, calling him brilliant. When I brought home a perfect math test years later, she said good job in a distracted voice and reminded me to wash my hands before dinner. There was always a soft glow around Daniel, a kind of inherited spotlight he did not even need to earn. He walked through the world with an ease I envied and feared at the same time, because I also learned early that the attention he received came with a shadow, one that often fell on me. When we were small, he played rough in ways that did not feel like play. He threw a rubber ball at my face so hard once that my lips split open, and when I cried, he shrugged and said that I should have caught it. My mother rushed to console him for being scolded by a neighbor who saw the incident, then turned to me with a warning not to be so sensitive. Boys are boys, Olivia. You need to toughen up. At 8 years old, I believed her because I wanted to be good and easy and loved. I tried to harden myself in small ways, holding tears behind my teeth like secrets, telling myself I was overreacting each time Daniel shoved me a little too hard or blocked the hallway just to see how long I would wait before squeezing past him. When our father died suddenly from a heart attack when I was 12, the balance in our house shifted in ways that left lasting bruises I still feel. My mother told Daniel that he had to step up now that he was the man of the house, her protector, the one she could rely on. She said it in front of me as though my existence was not relevant to the shape of our family anymore, as though grief had carved out a hierarchy with no room for the quiet daughter who did her homework without being asked. From that moment on, Daniel seemed to grow several inches in his own mind, carrying himself with an authority he had not earned but fully believed he possessed. He began policing my movements around the house, telling me which shows I could watch, which snacks I could eat, and even what time I should shower so he could have the bathroom first. My mother encouraged it, praising him for helping keep order and thanking him for looking after me, which confused me because his version of looking after me often left me bruised or humiliated. Once, when I was 13, he slammed a door in my face because I asked him to turn the music down while I studied. The edge of the door caught my forehead and left a swollen lump that pulsed for days. When my mother saw it, she sighed and said I needed to be more aware of my surroundings. Daniel apologized with a smirk that told me he was not sorry at all, and she pulled him into a hug for trying to be patient with me. I learned to shrink in the spaces where he expanded. I learned to bend so he would not break me. School became my only refuge, a place where my voice mattered just enough for teachers to call me bright or hardworking, though even those compliments felt like they belonged to a version of me that disappeared the moment I stepped back into our house. At home, my identity narrowed into one expectation: do not upset Daniel. My mother repeated it like scripture. Do not provoke him. Do not talk back. Do not question him when he teases you. He is just playing. He loves you. None of it felt like love, but I believed her because I wanted to preserve whatever fragile peace existed between us. There were moments when Daniel seemed almost normal, like the afternoons we played board games or built snowmen in the yard, but even those memories are tinged with an uneasiness I did not understand then. He always needed to win to be right, to be admired. If I beat him at a game, he accused me of cheating and knocked the pieces off the board. If my snowman looked better than his, he kicked it over while claiming he stumbled. My mother defended him each time, telling me not to be dramatic or selfish or suspicious. Those words became the framework of my childhood, shaping me into someone who questioned her own reality long before Daniel ever smashed a cake into my face. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly, a trail of small injuries I convinced myself were accidents, a mosaic of moments where my mother's protection bent always toward him and away from me. But at the time, I accepted the version of truth I was given, because children do not imagine that the people meant to love them can also be the ones who distort their sense of worth. I thought if I could just be quieter or kinder or more invisible, things would get better. Instead, invisibility became the language of my survival. I walked on eggshells so often the sound of them cracking beneath my feet became the background noise of my childhood. The person I became as an adult, the one who apologized for bleeding on her own birthday, was shaped by the years when silence was rewarded and pain was dismissed. And though I did not know it then, every moment of that childhood was preparing me for the day when Daniel's cruelty would no longer hide behind the word joke, but would reveal itself in a single, violent act that forced the truth into the open. By the time I reached adulthood, Daniel had perfected the kind of gaslighting that does not arrive in dramatic explosions, but settles into the fabric of everyday life, until you can no longer separate your own instincts from the story someone else has written for you. His favorite form of control was humiliation disguised as humor, a performance he enacted in front of family, friends, and even strangers, and every time I flinched or looked hurt, he insisted I was being too sensitive. When I was 20, he dumped an entire pitcher of ice water over my head at a 4th of July barbecue, just as I walked out onto the deck with a tray of food. The shock stole my breath and the cold shot straight through my body, making my teeth chatter, but the laughter that followed was louder than any physical sensation. My mother clapped her hands and told him he was hilarious, and when I protested, she pulled me aside and whispered that no one likes a girl who cannot take a joke. I stood there shivering, dripping water onto the wooden planks, believing again that the fault was mine. Later that year, he pushed me aside in the kitchen to reach something, and I stumbled into the counter hard enough to bruise. When I hissed in pain, he laughed and said I had balance issues. My mother nodded as if that were a fact she had always accepted. When relatives visited, Daniel performed kindness so convincingly that it almost fooled me. He would bring me a drink or drape an arm around my shoulders as if he were the protective big brother the world expected. But inevitably, the moment would sour. He would whisper something cutting in my ear, something like, "Try not to embarrass yourself tonight," or "Do not speak too much because people find you odd." Then he would step back and smile, making sure only I heard the venom. Every time I tried to confront him, he widened his eyes with mock confusion and told me I must have misunderstood. My mother always took his side, insisting that I should not twist his words or create drama. Her favorite line was, "Olivia is strong. She can handle herself." What she meant was simpler. Do not expect anyone to defend you. Your feelings are inconvenient. In 2020, long before the birthday that sent me to the emergency room, Daniel shoved me into a wall during an argument over the remote control. It was not a light shove. My wrist hit the edge of a shelf on the way down, and a sharp, burning pain shot through my arm. I knew instantly something was wrong. My fingers curled awkwardly, my hand trembling. But when I said I thought it might be fractured, my mother dismissed the idea with a quick wave of her hand. "Stop making everything dramatic. You bruise easily." Daniel did not apologize. Instead, he told me that I had walked into the shelf on my own. For a moment, I doubted myself because he sounded so sure. Maybe I had misstepped. Maybe the angle felt wrong because I was clumsy, not because he pushed me. I wrapped my wrist in an old elastic bandage and went to work the next day, pretending it was a minor sprain. Weeks later, when the pain dulled into a persistent ache, I convinced myself it was healing normally. It was only years afterward that I would learn from an X-ray that the injury had not been an accident at all. The gaslighting was not limited to physical moments. It seeped into conversations, expectations, even the silence between us. When I tried to set boundaries, he mocked me for being dramatic. If I avoided family gatherings after a bad interaction, he told everyone I was unstable or emotional. My mother repeated his words as if they were gospel truth. I began to internalize the narrative that I was difficult, that my perspective was flawed, that my memories could not be trusted. Daniel used this uncertainty to his advantage. At family dinners, he made jokes about my work at the hospital, implying I was just a glorified secretary rather than an assistant director. When I told him I felt demeaned, he said he was boosting my confidence by toughening me up. If I asked him to stop teasing me in front of guests, he claimed I was trying to control him. My mother backed him every time. She said he was just expressing himself and that I needed to lighten up. Even my attempts to talk about emotional hurt were reframed as attacks on the family. I started to notice that whenever something went wrong in the house, someone misplaced a bill or forgot an appointment, I was blamed. Daniel would shake his head in disappointment and say he expected better from me, and my mother would agree, even if I had nothing to do with the situation. Slowly, I learned to doubt my own memory. Had I really put the envelope on the counter, or did I forget? Had Daniel truly insulted me, or was I twisting his tone? That constant erosion of trust in myself is what allowed larger harms to go unchecked. If you are told long enough that you imagine pain eventually, you stop believing your body when it cries out. In the years leading up to my 29th birthday, Daniel's behavior escalated in subtle but unmistakable ways. He began recording me during family events, catching reactions he provoked, and sending clips to relatives with captions that made me sound unstable. He switched ingredients in my food once and claimed it was a harmless prank, even though it triggered an allergic flare that left me coughing all night. When I confronted him, he said I needed a better sense of humor. When I complained to my mother, she accused me of trying to create problems. By then, I had begun withdrawing into myself, avoiding conflict, avoiding attention, and avoiding any situation where I might be accused of wrongdoing. I moved through life trying to be so neutral that no one would notice me because being noticed often meant being blamed. Looking back, I see how deeply the gaslighting shaped me. It was not just that Daniel twisted the truth. It was that he taught me to twist it for him. He trained me to excuse him, to rationalize the pain he caused, and to believe that everything he did had an explanation that made it my fault. That is why on the night he smashed a cake into my face with enough force to knock me unconscious, a part of me still wondered whether I was overreacting. Gaslighting is not just a lie someone tells you. It is the process of teaching you to lie to yourself. And by the time Daniel finished teaching me, I no longer recognized which parts of my life were real and which parts he had written for me. The week leading up to my 29th birthday felt strange in a way I could not name at the time, a kind of restless tension humming beneath ordinary moments like a storm gathering behind a clear sky. My mother was unusually enthusiastic about hosting a party for me, insisting that it was time for the family to have a joyful evening together after what she called a year of unnecessary drama. She decorated the house with pastel streamers and ordered a massive cake from my favorite bakery, a detail that might have touched me if I had not sensed the edges of something darker beneath her cheerful planning. Daniel, who normally ignored birthdays unless they offered him a chance to be the center of attention, suddenly became invested in the event. He asked what I wanted, how many people were coming, what flavor the cake would be. His questions felt wrong, too precise, too practiced, like someone gathering details for something other than celebration. 3 days before the party, he sent me a text that read, "I have a great surprise planned for your big night." I stared at the message longer than necessary, unable to decide whether the chill that passed through me came from the words themselves or from the familiar dread they stirred inside me. Daniel's surprises had never been gifts. They were performances built on someone else's humiliation. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. I tried to breathe normally as I set my phone down, forcing a smile for a coworker who walked past my office door. At the hospital where I worked, I spent my days helping maintain order-solving problems, quietly keeping crises from escalating. It was ironic that I could navigate chaos at work, but felt powerless against the slow-rising anxiety my brother created just by existing. 2 days before the party, my mother called me during my lunch break. She wanted to confirm the guest list and asked me not to make things difficult with Daniel. He wants this to be special, Olivia. Do not ruin it with your attitude. I almost laughed at the idea of Daniel wanting anything to be special for me, but the sound stayed trapped in my throat. Instead, I reassured her that I would be on my best behavior, even though the idea of behaving felt complicated when simply breathing near my brother seemed to provoke him. That evening, I stopped by my mother's house to drop off some gifts I had picked up for relatives who would be attending. When I walked inside, Daniel was alone in the dining room, leaning over the cake box that had just been delivered. His shoulders were hunched, his head tilted at an angle I could not read. The box was still sealed with the bakery sticker, but he ran his fingers slowly along the cardboard as if memorizing the shape of it. When he heard me, he straightened quickly and forced a smile, the kind that stretched too wide and showed too many teeth. He said he was just curious about what Mom ordered, but the way he looked at the cake made something in me twist. It was not affection or anticipation. It was calculation. When I joked lightly that he should not ruin the surprise for himself, his expression flickered for a moment, a shadow crossing his face so fast it felt imagined. He told me not to worry and said everything would be perfect on Saturday. His voice had a sharpness beneath the sweetness like the edge of a blade hidden in frosting. Later that night, as I helped my mother arrange decorations, I noticed Daniel hovering nearby, not participating, just watching. His gaze followed me around the room with an intensity that felt off, as if he were studying something he planned to dismantle. When I caught him staring, he did not look away. Instead, he smiled again, slow and deliberate. Not the smile of a brother, but the smile of someone who knows a secret that will hurt you. At dinner, he sat across from me and tapped his fingers rhythmically against the table, a habit he displayed whenever he was excited about a prank. Mom asked him about work, and he launched into a story about a coworker who embarrassed herself during a staff meeting. He told it with gleeful detail, emphasizing how stupid she looked. As he spoke, he kept his eyes locked on me, as if the story was not about the coworker at all. It felt like a warning. Before I left for the night, I walked past the kitchen and heard Daniel talking on the phone. His voice was low but urgent. "No, it will be perfect. Trust me." She always reacts. I froze my hand, still resting on the doorframe. My breath caught somewhere between suspicion and denial. I tried to convince myself he was talking about something unrelated, but the certainty creeping into my chest refused to leave. The next morning, I woke with a headache that had nothing to do with physical pain. My thoughts were heavy clogged with images of Daniel in that cake box and his too pleasant smile. At work, I tried to focus on scheduling issues and vendor emails, but everything felt distant. When my colleague asked if I was excited for my party, I lied and said yes. I did not want to explain the feeling that something bad was coming, especially because I could not prove it. People like me do not trust their instincts easily. We have been taught not to. That evening, when I drove past my mother's house after stopping to pick up flowers, I saw through the window that Daniel was pacing through the living room holding the cake box as if weighing it in his hands. He set it down, then lifted it again, spinning it slightly, adjusting his grip. It looked like he was rehearsing something. A chill crawled up my spine, slow and undeniable. I watched for several seconds, unable to move, unable to pretend anymore that my fear was unreasonable. Even then, I tried to rationalize the scene. Maybe he was checking the decoration. Maybe he was planning a joke, but not intending to hurt me. Maybe I was catastrophizing because of everything he had done before. But deep down, beneath all the excuses, a truth pulsed steady and cold. Something was wrong. My body knew it even when my mind tried to silence it. And though I did not realize it then, the hours leading up to my 29th birthday were not a build-up to a celebration. They were the quiet tightening of a trap Daniel had been constructing for years. The moment the cake hit my face, the world fractured into two versions of reality, the one everyone else insisted I was living in, and the one my body knew was happening. I remember standing in front of the dining table, the candles on the cake flickering gently, the room filled with the soft murmur of guests preparing to sing. My mother told me to smile. Daniel hovered behind me with restless energy, and I inhaled deeply, trying to convince myself that the uneasiness clawing at my stomach was irrational. But the second I leaned forward to take a breath and blow out the candles, everything changed. Daniel lifted the cake with both hands, and before I could register the movement, he smashed it into my face with a force that felt less like a prank and more like an assault. The impact was so hard that the back of my head snapped sideways and my left cheekbone slammed into the sharp corner of the glass table. A sharp crack echoed inside my skull, a sound so intimate and so wrong that I knew instantly something had gone beyond the line of a joke. The sweetness of the frosting hit me first, coating my lips and nose, but beneath it, a metallic sting spread across the inside of my mouth where my teeth had cut into my cheek. My vision burst into white and pink streaks, then collapsed into darkness for a second that felt endless. When I crashed to the floor, my knees buckled under me, unable to support the weight of my spinning body. The room tilted violently like a carnival ride with no safety bar. A wave of nausea surged through me. For a long moment, I could not tell if I was breathing. Then the laughter began. It poured over me in sharp bursts, each one slicing deeper than the last. Someone said she fell so fast. Someone else said Daniel got her good. I heard a phone camera click. The sound cut through my fog like a blade. Blindly reaching for support, I pressed my hand to the floor, but my palm slipped on frosting, sending me sprawling again. I tried to lift my head, but a stabbing pain radiated from behind my ear, blinding and immediate. The room wavered in double images, bright lights splitting in two faces, swirling like reflections on water. I could barely hear anything on my left side, only a low, humming vibration that did not match the actual noise in the room. When I finally managed to open my eyes enough to see shapes, Daniel stood above me, phone lifted, recording. His expression was not playful. There was no hint of concern in the curve of his mouth. Instead, he looked satisfied, as if he had executed something exactly the way he planned. He angled the phone closer and said loudly, "Olivia, really, you are so dramatic." I blinked hard, confused by the violence of the moment, trying to understand why no one was helping me. A guest stepped forward, but instead of offering a hand, she raised her phone to capture another picture. Someone else laughed and said that I should lighten up. I pushed myself upright again, though the movement sent a bolt of pain through my jaw that made my eyes water. My mother rushed over then, but not to help. She began wiping frosting from my face with quick, irritated motions as though I had spilled something on her favorite tablecloth. She kept repeating that I needed to stop making a scene, stop overreacting, stop ruining my own birthday. Her eyes kept darting toward the guests, checking to see who was watching. I tried to speak, but the words slurred together. My tongue felt thick, my thoughts slipping like pebbles through my fingers. I steadied myself on the edge of the table and felt another wave of dizziness. My left ear pulsed, each heartbeat echoing like a drum. When I looked down, I saw a smear of red on the edge of the glass where my face had hit it. I touched the spot behind my ear and felt something warm and wet. When I pulled my hand back, there was blood on my fingertips. I must have gasped because Daniel snorted and said it was a tiny scratch. My mother told me to clean myself up, insisting that guests were uncomfortable. No one suggested calling for help. No one even paused to consider it. My body kept swaying, my legs trembling under me, but they all kept insisting it was just a joke, or that I had tripped, or that the cake had been heavier than expected. Daniel moved closer and whispered something so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. "You always ruin everything." His breath smelled like beer and frosting. The words slithered into my ear and settled deep, anchoring themselves in the place where fear had already begun to bloom. I stumbled toward the hallway, desperate to get away from the crowd, desperate for air, desperate for something that felt like safety. The lights along the walls flickered into starbursts as I passed them. My hand skimmed the hallway paint, leaving a faint trail of pink cream behind. Every step sent a new wave of pain through my skull. I felt nauseous but forced myself to keep moving. Behind me, laughter rose again, the party resuming as if nothing had happened, as if I had not just been knocked unconscious moments earlier, as if my pain were something fictional, a character flaw instead of a warning. In the bathroom, I braced myself against the sink and looked into the mirror. My face was a mask of smeared frosting and streaked blood. One eye was already beginning to swell. My reflection did not look like me. It looked like a ghost of someone who had been pretending for too long. The dizziness intensified until the floor rippled beneath me. I reached for the counter mist and dropped to my knees. For a moment, everything went dark again. When I came to the room, felt colder. My mother knocked on the door and told me that the guests were asking where I was. She asked me not to embarrass her. She did not ask how I felt. I pressed a towel to my head, breathing through the pain, trying to assemble myself enough to leave the bathroom. My thoughts were a tangled blur. All I knew was that something was deeply, dangerously wrong. But surrounded by people who insisted I was fine, I started to wonder again if maybe they were right and I was the problem. It was a familiar thought, one that had been planted in me slowly year after year until it bloomed effortlessly. And it was that doubt more than the injury itself that kept me from walking away that night. It nearly kept me from seeking help at all. When I finally made it home that night, the silence inside my apartment felt too large, stretching into every corner like a presence waiting for me to collapse into it. I kicked the door shut with more force than intended because my balance was slipping again, and a wave of dizziness rolled through me so hard that I had to brace myself against the wall. My keys clattered onto the floor, and when I bent to pick them up, the sudden drop of my head sent a sharp bolt of pain slicing through the base of my skull. I froze, gripping the doorknob, breathing through the throbbing pressure behind my eye. The frosting that still clung to my hair had dried into a crusty film that smelled sickeningly sweet, mixing with the faint metallic scent of the blood that had begun to dry behind my ear. I wanted to shower it all off, wash the humiliation and pain down the drain, but even standing upright felt unstable. My left ear was still humming with that dull, vibrating sound as if someone were running an engine under my skin. It made everything around me feel far away, like I was submerged underwater. I dropped onto the edge of my couch and pressed both hands against my temples, trying to steady the spinning world. My phone buzzed. I flinched so violently that pain shot down my neck. When I looked at the screen, it was a message from my mother. Do not exaggerate. You bruise easily. Rest and stop worrying. You embarrassed Daniel tonight. The words stung in a way I hated myself for letting them sting. Even in the quiet of my apartment with blood drying on my fingers and dizziness clawing through my head, part of me still wondered whether she might be right. Maybe I was making too big a deal out of it. Maybe the fall had made it look worse than it felt. Maybe if I had laughed instead of recoiled, the room would not have turned cold, except my body kept telling me a different story. When I tried to stand, my legs trembled. When I touched the side of my head where it hit the table, a deep ache pulsed beneath my fingertips. When I swallowed, there was a tightness in my throat that made breathing feel uneven. I walked to the bathroom and switched on the light, but the brightness stabbed my eyes so sharply that I had to lean against the doorframe and blink until the shape settled. My reflection was somehow worse than before. The swelling around my left eye had deepened into a dark bruise blooming beneath the skin. A faint red trickle had dried along my neck. The back of my head throbbed with each heartbeat, and the area behind my ear was tender enough that even a gentle touch sent pain radiating down my jaw. When I lifted my hair to inspect the injury, another wave of nausea hit me. I clutched the sink with both hands until it passed. The room swayed again, the floor tilting to one side like a ship unsteady at sea. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water across my face, hoping to shock myself into clarity. For a moment, I felt steadier, but the relief faded quickly. When I wiped my eyes, I noticed pink streaks mixing with the water dribbling down my chin. My stomach tightened. I leaned heavily on the counter, trying to breathe evenly, reminding myself that dizziness could just be from the fall or exhaustion. But the truth was louder than any rationalization. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Still, I heard my mother's voice in my head, sharp as a reprimand. Stop being dramatic. You always make things bigger than they are. I hated how easily her words overpowered the instinct screaming inside me. I left the bathroom and tried to lie down, thinking rest might help, but the moment my head touched the pillow, a jolt of pain shot down the side of my face and into my teeth. I cried out softly, more from fear than from pain. I tried different positions, but nothing relieved the heaviness in my skull. Eventually, I sat back up, hugging a pillow to my chest, rocking slightly as the room pulsed around me. Every few minutes, a sharp ringing pierced through my left ear, followed by a numbness that made sound feel hollow. My vision blurred when I blinked too slowly. At one point, I reached for a glass of water but realized halfway through lifting it that my hand was shaking uncontrollably. I set it down quickly before I dropped it. The apartment felt colder, though I could not tell if the temperature had actually changed or if it was just my body sliding into some deeper level of shock. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the couch, letting the silence stretch on until it felt suffocating. I looked at the clock. It was past 1 in the morning. I considered calling someone, maybe a coworker, maybe even Aunt Meredith, but shame pressed against my ribs like a weight. What would I say? My brother smashed a cake into my face. I fell. I think something is wrong. It sounded ridiculous even inside my own mind. That is what years of gaslighting does. It teaches you to mistrust your own pain. Another hour passed. I drifted in and out of shallow sleep, jerking awake every time my head tilted. At one point, I woke to a sharp pulse behind my eye, so intense that I grabbed the side of the couch to steady myself. My left ear had gone almost entirely silent. Panic surged inside me, hot and immediate. I stumbled back to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and saw that the cut behind my ear had started seeping again. A thin line of red traced down my neck. I stared at myself in the mirror, shivering. My face was pale beneath the bruising. My eyes looked unfocused, almost vacant. For a long moment, I just stood there, gripping the counter, breathing like someone trying not to break open. At 3 in the morning, my fear finally outweighed my conditioning. I knew if I stayed home and tried to sleep, something terrible could happen. People with head injuries sometimes do not wake up. I had seen it at the hospital. I had charted those cases. I wiped my face, grabbed my keys, and forced my trembling body to the door. As I stepped outside into the cold Denver night, one thought repeated itself with chilling certainty. If I did not go to the emergency room now, I might not live to see the morning. The drive to the emergency room felt like traveling through a tunnel made of blurred lights and shallow breaths, each passing street lamp stretching into a streak of color as my vision struggled to focus. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, though my fingers kept slipping from sweat and tremors, and every bump in the road sent a shockwave of pain radiating from the back of my skull to my jaw. I kept telling myself to stay awake, stay alert, stay alive. Denver's early morning air was still and dark, the kind of quiet that should have been calming, but instead it pressed against me, amplifying every throb inside my head. When I finally pulled into the hospital lot, my legs felt rubbery beneath me. I nearly collapsed against the car door as I stepped out the cold air brushing against the side of my face, where dried frosting still clung to my hair. The sliding doors opened, and the fluorescent lights inside hit me like a blow. I flinched, covering one eye, trying not to vomit, as the brightness intensified my vertigo. A nurse behind the intake desk noticed instantly, rushing over with a firmness that cut through the fog surrounding me. "Are you all right?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked into a whisper. "My head. I fell. My brother." The words tangled together, fragile and confused. She placed a steadying hand on my elbow and guided me to a wheelchair, her touch gentle but decisive. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" she asked while rolling me into an exam room. "Just a cake," I murmured, the absurdity of the sentence hanging between us. He smashed a cake into my face and I hit the table. The nurse paused, her brows tightening in a way I had seen countless times at work. Concern mixed with suspicion. Not judgment, but assessment. She nodded once without pressing further, then dimmed the overhead light when she saw me wince. "We are going to take care of you," she said, and disappeared through the curtain. My hands shook uncontrollably as I waited, the room spinning in slow, nauseating circles. My ears hummed. My skull pulsed. My mind kept drifting toward sleep, even though fear clawed at my chest. I forced my eyes open each time they fluttered shut. I remembered patients at the hospital who had walked in talking coherent, insisting they were fine, only to deteriorate within hours because of unseen brain injuries. The thought chilled me. When Dr. Sanders stepped into the room, his face softened at the sight of me. Olivia, is that you? He asked, recognizing me from work. Embarrassment flooded my cheeks, though it hurt to smile or even attempt to. He crouched slightly to look at my eyes, tracking my pupils as they darted weakly. Tell me what happened. I repeated the story slower this time, each sentence pressing against the tightness in my throat. He listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with each detail. When I finished, he placed a hand lightly on my shoulder and said, Olivia, this is more than just a fall. I need to run a neurological exam. His voice held no panic, only the controlled urgency of someone who had done this countless times. He asked me to follow his finger with my eyes. I tried, but the motion made my vision double. He asked me to smile. One side of my face hesitated. He asked me to turn my head to the left. A flash of agony shot through me, forcing a cry from my chest. He stepped back, jaw tightening. We are sending you for imaging immediately. I nodded weakly, too exhausted to argue. When the nurse returned to wheel me toward radiology, I realized I had started shivering. Not from cold, but from something deeper, of fear rising from my bones. Inside the imaging room, the technician spoke softly, helping me onto the table. Please, lie very still, she instructed, sliding a cushion beneath my head. The machine hummed to life, its rhythmic thumping, drowning out the buzzing inside my skull. As the scanner circled above me, memories from the night replayed in distorted flashes. Daniel laughing, my mother wiping my face with irritation, guests lifting phones instead of helping, the sound of my head hitting the table corner, the cold bathroom floor, blood mixing with frosting, the world dimming. When the scan finished, the technician helped me sit up slowly. You are doing great, she said quietly, though her eyes flickered with something like worry. Back in the exam room, I waited in a haze, fighting exhaustion while holding the blanket the nurse draped over my shoulders. The pressure in my skull grew sharper, more defined, like something inside was pushing outward. The lightheadedness worsened each time I breathed too deeply. A tear slid down my cheek before I even realized I was crying. I wiped it away with a trembling hand just as Dr. Sanders returned holding the images. One look at his face made my stomach drop. He closed the door behind him, pulled a stool close, and sat down. Olivia, he said, his voice lower than before. We found some things on the scans that we need to talk about. His eyes met mine, steady and careful. First, you have a skull fracture behind your left ear. It is small but significant. You likely hit the table with considerable force. My breath hitched. He continued before I could speak. There is also something else. Another fracture. One that has already healed. Based on the imaging, it occurred 2 or 3 years ago. I stared at him, stunned, the air leaking from my lungs in a soundless exhale. He watched me closely, giving me room to process even as alarm etched itself into his features. Olivia, he said gently, injuries like these do not happen from simple accidents. I opened my mouth, but no words formed. My mind raced back to the night I fell down the stairs at my mother's house, the night Daniel insisted I slipped because I was clumsy, the night my mother told me to stop making things up. I felt the room tilt. Dr. Sanders steadied my hand. Olivia, I am required to contact law enforcement when I suspect intentional harm. He reached for the phone mounted on the wall. As he dialed, the hum in my left ear grew louder, echoing like a distant siren. For the first time in years, my body and the truth finally aligned. This was not an accident, and I was no longer the only one who knew. The moment Dr. Sanders hung up the phone, a dense and unfamiliar silence settled over the small exam room, the kind that feels charged with something irreversible. I watched his hand linger on the receiver as if he were considering what to say next, though his eyes were already full of the truth he knew I was not prepared to absorb. He took a slow breath, letting it out carefully before turning back toward me with an expression that held both professional composure and unmistakable concern. Olivia, he said gently, I want you to stay seated and keep your head as still as possible. The dizziness that had been pulsing through me since the fall intensified, leaving my vision swimming at the edges. My hands tightened around the thin blanket across my lap, and I felt the fabric bunch beneath trembling fingers. What does it mean? I whispered, though part of me feared the answer. He pulled the rolling stool closer, positioning himself at eye level, his voice steady but carrying a heaviness that made the air feel colder. Your fracture is what we call a temporal bone fracture. It is not immediately life-threatening, but it can be dangerous if untreated. You also have signs of potential inner ear trauma. That humming in your left ear could be related to that. I nodded faintly, though a surge of nausea fluttered in my chest. My thoughts lagged several seconds behind each word he spoke. But the older fracture concerns me even more, he continued. That kind of injury requires significant force. Most people remember an event strong enough to cause it. His eyes searched mine gently, as if he already suspected the truth. I was struggling to piece together. My breath hitched as memories resurfaced like broken pieces of glass rising through dark water. The staircase, the dent in the drywall, my mother saying I needed to be more careful, Daniel insisting I tripped. I felt my throat tighten so quickly it surprised me. I did not trip. I whispered, my voice barely audible. I knew it the moment the words left my lips. My body had known it for years. Dr. Sanders straightened, not in shock, but in confirmation. He placed a light hand on my shoulder and spoke with the clarity of someone used to delivering difficult truths. Injuries like these are often associated with assault. The room felt smaller instantly, the walls inching inward until the air grew tight around my lungs. The buzzing in my left ear grew louder, transforming into a nearly unbearable vibration. I closed my eyes, willing the noise to quiet, but the moment I did, another memory surfaced. Daniel standing behind me on the stairs. Daniel saying I am too dramatic. Daniel laughing as I cried. My eyes snapped open. My voice trembled when I spoke. He pushed me. Years ago. I always knew. I swallowed hard. I did not let myself believe it. Dr. Sanders nodded slowly, his expression full of the kind of quiet empathy that makes denial impossible. People who experience repeated harm often normalize it. You are not alone in that. His words cut through the fog surrounding me, sharp and steady. For a moment, I could not breathe. The weight of everything I had dismissed, silenced, forgiven, or rationalized pressed down on my chest with crushing force. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and the nurse from earlier stepped inside, her gaze flicking briefly between us. They are ready for the report, she said, her voice low and deliberate. Dr. Sanders nodded. Thank you. Please stay with her a moment. The nurse moved closer, offering a comforting presence as he stepped out into the hallway. I could hear his voice muffled but firm, giving details I never imagined would be spoken out loud about me. Suspected assault. Temporal bone fracture. Prior healed fracture. Patient shows signs of acute neurological distress. My stomach twisted. The reality of the situation grew sharper with each overheard phrase. This was no longer something that could be brushed aside or repackaged as a misunderstanding. This was a record, a report, a line drawn between truth and years of denial. When Dr. Sanders returned, he carried the seriousness of someone who had done everything correctly and now could only wait for the next steps to fall into place. Law enforcement is on their way, he said gently. They will want to speak with you. A chill raced through me. Tonight, I looked down at my trembling hands, the nails still caked with traces of frosting and blood. The absurdity of it struck me again, but this time it felt sinister rather than surreal. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying not to shake. I do not know what to say to them. I admitted shame creeping up my spine. For years, I had been conditioned to feel responsible for every moment of conflict in my family. The idea of accusing Daniel felt like crossing a line I had spent my entire life avoiding. Dr. Sanders pulled up a chair again and sat beside me. You do not have to know every word right now, he said softly. You just have to tell the truth. They will guide you through the rest. My throat tightened again. What if they do not believe me? He held my gaze with calm certainty. They will. You are injured. The scans speak for themselves. The door opened then, and the nurse stepped inside once more. Her eyes carried the same expression I had seen on trauma nurses countless times, a mixture of compassion and grim preparedness. They are here, she said. Law enforcement. My pulse quickened. For a second, fear coiled in my chest so tightly that I thought I might faint. She placed a steadying hand on my arm and spoke softly. "You are safe here, Olivia. Nothing bad is going to happen to you in this room." Her words brought heat behind my eyes, and I blinked rapidly to keep the tears from spilling. As I inhaled shakily, the nurse helped reposition the blanket around my shoulders, and Dr. Sanders stepped aside as footsteps approached outside the door. In that moment, as I prepared to face the people who would unravel everything I had buried, I realized that my life had shifted again, not with the force of Daniel's blow, but with the unmistakable clarity of truth finally being named. And as the door opened for the detective who would change the direction of my future, one final thought flickered through my mind. This was not the beginning of disaster. It was the beginning of something long overdue. The detective who stepped into the room carried himself with a calm confidence that immediately shifted the atmosphere as if the walls expanded just enough for me to breathe again. He was tall, with graying hair at the temples, and a steady gaze that suggested he had seen countless versions of this moment before. Moments where someone like me sat on an exam table trying to hold herself together, while the truth stretched and strained inside her chest. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle me, and introduced himself with a voice low enough to feel safe. "My name is Detective Marcus Long. I am with the Denver Police Department. I understand you have been injured, and I am here to talk with you about what happened." His tone was professional but unusually gentle, the kind of voice that seemed built to coax honesty from people who feared their own memories. I swallowed hard and nodded, trying to steady my breathing. The nurse remained near the doorway, her presence anchoring me. Dr. Sanders lingered a few steps behind her, silent but vigilant, as though he feared I might crumble under the weight of a single wrong question. Detective Long pulled up the small plastic chair and sat at eye level, keeping a respectful distance. "Before we begin," he said carefully, "I want you to know two things. First, you are not in trouble. Second, you are safe here." Those two sentences loosened something inside me that I had not realized was clenched. Safe, not in trouble. Two concepts I had rarely felt in my own family's home. He placed a small recorder on the rolling table beside us, but did not turn it on yet. "I only record with your permission, Olivia." "Do you feel comfortable with that?" I hesitated, not because I distrusted him, but because my entire life had been shaped around the idea that speaking up would only make things worse. My brother always said the loudest people were the liars, and I had spent years fearing that if I raised my voice, no one would hear the truth beneath the tremor. Still, I nodded. "Yes." He clicked on the recorder, announced the date and time, and began with the most basic question, though it carried the weight of years. "Olivia, can you tell me in your own words what happened last night at your birthday gathering?" My mouth went dry. I stared at my hands, still faintly stained from the blood behind my ear and the frosting Daniel had smashed into my skin. I started slowly describing the living room, the candles, the laughing guests, the smell of wine and sugar in the air. I explained how Daniel had come up behind me with the cake and how his wrist had twisted with purposeful force, not clumsy celebration. I described the impact, the way the world flickered, and the moment when my head hit the edge of the table. I told him no one helped me. And then I told him the part I had been afraid to speak out loud. He smiled, I whispered. "After I fell." He smiled like he meant it. Detective Long nodded thoughtfully, jotting notes, even though the recorder was running. "Was your brother intoxicated?" "Some," I said, but it was not the kind of laugh that comes from being drunk. "It was something else." He paused. "Has your brother ever hurt you before?" The question pierced through me like a cold wind. My heart lurched in my chest because I knew this was where everything inside me would either collapse or finally make sense. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled. I did not know how to answer without sounding dramatic, the very accusation Daniel and my mother had used as a weapon against me for years. Detective Long saw the panic forming behind my eyes. He softened his voice further. "Take your time. I am not looking for perfect sentences. I am looking for truth." The room felt warm again, and I let out a shaky breath. "Yes," I said, finally the admission cracking me open. There were times, many times. I described the staircase incident, the shove that sent me tumbling. I told him about the time Daniel pinned me to the wall during an argument over a television remote, the ice water incident, the humiliation during family gatherings. He listened without blinking, without rushing, without offering excuses on behalf of my family. Not once did he ask me what I had done to provoke it, a question my mother had always asked first. When I finished, he asked the question that made my stomach twist into a knot. "Did your family ever encourage you to seek medical help after those incidents?" "No," I whispered. "They said it was normal. They said I exaggerated." Detective Long nodded again, but this time with a look that told me everything I had endured had a definition in the world beyond my family's walls. Pattern behavior, escalation, a cycle that might have stayed invisible forever if not for the X-ray. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands. "Olivia, based on what you are telling me and based on your injuries, this is not an isolated incident. This is ongoing harm. Your brother's actions last night could have seriously endangered your life." I swallowed hard. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why am I only seeing it now?" "Because people do not see patterns when they are living inside them," he replied gently. "You learned to survive by minimizing the danger. That does not make you weak. It makes you human." My eyes stung, not from pain, but from the shock of being understood so completely by someone I had met less than an hour earlier. He then asked permission to review the medical images I had been shown. When he leaned over the screen, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The fracture, the older injury, the swelling near my left ear. He looked back at me with a grave steadiness. This was not a prank. This was not harmless. Someone applied significant force to your head, and the previous injury tells us this has been happening for years. My chest tightened as tears spilled down my cheeks. For the first time, they did not feel like weakness. They felt like release. Detective Long handed me a box of tissues and let the silence settle. After a moment, he clicked off the recorder. "That is enough for tonight, Olivia. We will continue tomorrow, but I want to be clear about something. What happened to you is real, and we are going to address it." As he stood, the weight of his words anchored me in a way I had never felt before. Real. Addressed. Two promises my family had never given me. As he left the room, I felt the faintest shift inside my chest, a tremor of something unfamiliar. Safety. Or perhaps the earliest edge of justice. When Aunt Meredith stepped into the hospital room, it felt like a sudden shift in temperature, as if someone had opened a window and let in air I did not realize I had been starving for. She moved with the calm purpose of someone who had long carried truths no one wanted to hear. And the moment her eyes met mine, the worry etched across her face told me she already knew the situation was far more serious than a birthday mishap. She walked straight to my bedside and took my hand with a firmness that steadied the trembling in my fingers. "Olivia," she said quietly, "I came as soon as I heard." Detective Long stood near the doorway, giving us space but staying close enough to observe. Her presence clearly surprised him, and when he introduced himself, she nodded politely but with a hint of recognition in her eyes that made me wonder how much she already suspected. He explained that he was gathering statements and asked if she felt comfortable answering a few questions. She agreed, without hesitation, pulling the chair closer and sitting with the posture of someone preparing to carry a burden she had held for years. Before he could even begin, she looked at me with an expression I had not seen from any family member in decades. Compassion mixed with sorrow and something deeper. A protective instinct that had been muted but never extinguished. "Olivia," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have watched things for a long time. Longer than you know." My stomach tightened as she took a slow breath, her fingers still wrapped around mine. "I saw what happened to you when you were little. Your mother never wanted to talk about it, but I saw." Detective Long gently leaned forward. "Meredith, can you describe what you witnessed?" She nodded, her lips pressed together as though bracing herself to reopen old wounds. "When Olivia was 13, I was visiting your mother for the weekend. You and Daniel were arguing on the porch steps, nothing heated, just normal sibling tension. At least I thought so. But then Daniel gave you a shove. Not a playful nudge. A shove meant to hurt. You fell 2 steps down and hit your shoulder and the side of your head. I remember the sound you made when you hit the concrete. My breath caught in my throat as a faint memory flickered at the edge of my mind, blurred and distant, but unmistakably real. I could almost feel the rough scrape of concrete against my skin. What happened next? Detective Long asked, his voice low. Meredith's expression darkened. Your mother rushed outside and immediately asked Olivia what she had done to make him so angry. She did not ask if she was hurt. She did not even look at the swelling near her temple. She told Daniel to go inside before the neighbor saw anything. My chest tightened painfully. The memory sharpened further. My mother dragging me to the sink, the cold washcloth pressed too hard against my cheek. Her voice repeating the words, "Stop crying over nothing." My aunt continued glancing at me with tears forming in her eyes. "I wanted to take you to urgent care, but your mother would not allow it. She said it would humiliate Daniel." She turned back to the detective. "That was the first time I saw something wrong. But it was not the last." Detective Long's jaw tightened slightly, betraying a flash of anger before he composed himself again. "Did you witness other incidents?" "Yes," she said immediately. Too many small things to count. The way he grabbed her arm when he thought no one was watching. The way she flinched when he walked into a room. Things children should not have to feel. Then when Olivia was 17, there was another fall. Down the back stairs at your mother's house. I was not there that day, but your mother called me afterward, upset, complaining that Olivia was being dramatic again. But she mentioned bruising behind your ear. A specific bruise. Meredith swallowed, steadying her voice. "The same place where your fracture is now." My pulse hammered so loudly that I felt it echo through my chest and throat. The older fracture. The one I pretended did not exist. The one I had accepted as clumsiness because that was the story I had been fed. Detective Long spoke softly but with unmistakable urgency. "Meredith, why did you never report any of this?" She closed her eyes briefly, guilt washing across her face. "I tried to intervene. Many times. Your mother shut me out. Told me I did not understand family loyalty. Told me I was stirring up trouble. And Olivia was so quiet. I worried that if I pushed too hard, you would be blamed even more. I did not know the extent of it until today." She reached for my hand again and squeezed it gently. "I am sorry, sweetheart. I should have done more." Tears spilled down my cheeks, but they were not from pain. They were from the flood of validation I had waited my entire life to hear. Someone had seen. Someone had remembered. Someone had believed me before I had learned to believe myself. Detective Long turned toward me with a softened expression. "Olivia, this confirms a long-term pattern of harm. Your injuries, your memories, and your aunt's testimony align. This is not an accident. This is not a single incident. This is an established history of physical aggression." A cold wave rolled through me as the truth settled deeper into place. Everything I had dismissed, everything I had excused, everything I had absorbed quietly so I would not be the problem. My aunt wiped her cheeks and continued. "Olivia, I need to tell you something else. Something I never told your mother. Years ago, I overheard Daniel talking to a friend at a family barbecue. He said you always got everything, that you were the favorite, that when your father died, you became the center of attention. He was angry, furious. I felt my heart drop. Daniel had always claimed I was jealous of him, but now I understood. The resentment had never been mine. It had always been his." Detective Long leaned back, digesting every detail. "This helps us understand motive," he said. "Not legally required, but important for the pattern." My aunt nodded. "There is something fundamentally wrong in the way he sees Olivia. It is not sibling rivalry. It is fixation, resentment, a desire to control her." The words hit me with a clarity that made my pulse race. Control. That was the thread running through everything. The shoves, the jokes, the humiliation, the staircase, the cake, all of it. My aunt squeezed my hand again. "Olivia, you did not deserve any of this. You never did." I looked at her and realized this was the first time someone in my family had spoken those words aloud. For a moment, the ache in my skull felt lighter, the ground steadier, the truth finally beginning to replace the fog. Detective Long stood his expression resolute. "Meredith, thank you. Your statement is incredibly important." He turned to me. "And Olivia, this changes everything. You are no longer standing alone in your memories. You have a witness. And with that single sentence, the world I had known for 29 years began to shift, realigning itself around the truth that had always been waiting beneath the surface. Detective Long returned later that afternoon, carrying a manila folder thick enough to make my stomach twist with anticipation, the kind of folder that could dismantle or confirm an entire lifetime of doubt in a matter of minutes. He took a seat beside the hospital bed, laying the folder on his lap with a care that made it clear whatever he was about to show me was not routine. "Olivia," he said gently, "we have begun reviewing the evidence collected so far, including digital material and witness statements." I felt my throat tighten as he opened the folder and pulled out the first printed image. It was a still frame from the video someone at the party had recorded on their phone the moment Daniel lifted the cake. Frozen in time, his expression looked different from how I remembered it during the chaos. There was no sign of joy or mischief. His jaw was clenched, his eyes locked on the back of my head with a focus that sent a cold ripple down my spine. "This still frame alone does not prove intent," he explained, "but it supports the possibility." He then slid the next image forward. It captured the same second from another angle, one shot by a different guest. This one showed his feet positioned in a wide stance, braced for force. Not casual, not accidental, deliberate. My chest tightened. I had expected the footage to look chaotic or ambiguous. Instead, it presented a version of reality I had spent years learning not to see. "We analyzed the video for body mechanics," he continued. "Although we cannot say legally that this proves intent, the force and direction of the strike align more with an act intended to knock you forward than a celebratory motion." I nodded slowly, absorbing each word. He reached into the folder again and pulled out a printed screenshot of a search history report. "When we recovered your brother's phone, he said we found some recent searches that raised concern." He placed the sheet on the bed near my hands. I scanned the page, my pulse quickening as the words blurred together before sharpening. How much force to cause a concussion? What happens when someone hits the side of their head? How long does someone stay dizzy after a fall? I felt sick. "These could be unrelated," I said weakly. It felt like denial slipping out before I could catch it. "It is possible," he acknowledged, "but unlikely. The searches were made within 72 hours of your birthday." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. This was not a random mistake. This was preparation. He went on. "We also found an image folder labeled Opportunities. It did not contain anything graphic or explicit, but there were pictures of locations in your mother's house. The porch steps, the back staircase, the dining room, all places tied to past injuries you have mentioned." My breath caught at the word. Opportunities. As if my pain were a schedule he could plan around. As if hurting me were a task that required strategy. Detective Long watched my reaction closely but continued carefully. "Again, this does not prove intent on its own. But taken together with witness statements and your medical history, the pattern becomes significant." He then showed me a report comparing my current CT scan with the healed fracture from years earlier. The alignment of the injuries, he said, suggests similar blunt force trauma to the same region of the skull. The likelihood of two unrelated accidents striking the same vulnerable point is low. I stared at the scans, the grayscale images twisting into something painfully clear. My body had recorded every moment I tried to forget. My bones remembered everything my mind had been trained to minimize. He placed the scans back into the folder, then pulled out a statement signed earlier that morning. "This is from your aunt," he said. "Her testimony corroborates a pattern of escalating behavior. She mentioned the shove on the porch, the stair fall, the bruising behind your ear. She also mentioned hearing your mother dismiss your injuries repeatedly." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. Seeing her words typed and formalized struck me harder than when she spoke them. They became undeniable, documented, real. Detective Long continued gently. "We also interviewed 3 guests from your birthday party. 2 confirmed that Daniel appeared to angle himself deliberately before hitting you with the cake. One said she thought the motion looked too forceful to be playful. Another admitted she was uncomfortable but did not want to get involved." I exhaled shakily. That sounded exactly like my family. People saw, people knew, but silence always won. He leaned closer, his voice calm but resolute. The strongest piece of evidence remains the medical findings. Your fracture, the older injury, the neurological symptoms. These combined with the footage and testimony present a very strong case that the harm was not accidental. I felt my pulse echo in my ears. A question surfaced fragile and trembling. What does this mean legally? He paused, choosing his words with care. Right now, this means probable cause. Enough for charges to be considered. Enough for intervention to be warranted. Enough to protect you. A slow tremor ran through my body. For the first time, the reality of consequences began to crystallize. Daniel might actually face accountability, not excuses, not laughter, not a mother smoothing everything over. Real consequences. Detective Long closed the folder gently. Olivia, one of the most important things I can tell you is that this pattern is not your fault. People who grow up surrounded by minimizing and denial learn to see their own pain as exaggeration. You have survived by shrinking the truth, but the evidence does not shrink. And now that the truth is visible, we can act. I pressed my palm against my sternum as if to steady the pounding beneath it. Every piece of evidence he had shown me created a picture I could no longer undo. A picture that revealed not just what happened that night, but what had been happening for most of my life. Detective Long stood and gave me a moment of silence before speaking again. The next step is confronting Daniel with this evidence. I felt my breath hitch. Will I have to be there? Only if you choose to be, he assured me. You have already done the hardest part. Your body told the truth. Now the evidence confirms it. He gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and paused at the foot of the bed. This is no longer a question of whether something happened. It is now a question of what happens next. After Detective Long left the room, I sat frozen in a silence so heavy it felt physical, like a weight pressing against my ribs from the inside. For years, I had carried Daniel's cruelty as if it were some mysterious flaw inside me, an unprovable ache that everyone else insisted was just a misunderstanding or a personality clash. But now that the evidence had been laid out plainly, the question that rose above the shock was one I had avoided asking for most of my life. Why would my own brother want to hurt me? That question lingered long after the hum of the machines blended into the background. When Detective Long returned the next morning, he carried a different energy with him, more focused, more deliberate. He took the seat beside my bed again, and this time he did not open a folder. He simply clasped his hands together and looked at me with a steady calm. Olivia, I think it is time to talk about motive. The word hit me like cold water. Motive. Not accident, not misunderstanding. Motive. He continued. You mentioned during our earlier conversation that when your father passed away, certain responsibilities and expectations fell on Daniel. I nodded slowly. My father had been the soft place in my childhood, the one who interrupted Daniel's teasing when it went too far, the one who pulled me close when I cried, the one who reminded my mother that fairness mattered. When he died, everything changed. My mother, overwhelmed by grief, leaned on Daniel like he was the last branch of a tree she could still hold. And Daniel, only 14, but already far too accustomed to getting what he wanted, stepped into the space my father left behind with a sense of entitlement rather than responsibility. Detective Long asked, "How did that shift affect you?" I swallowed hard. I became invisible, not literally, but close enough. Daniel took over decisions. Daniel controlled the mood of the house. Daniel could do no wrong. I learned to stay small just to survive the tension. He nodded. And yet your father left certain financial protections specifically for you. I closed my eyes for a moment. That part had always felt like a wound I was not allowed to talk about. Yes. When my father died, there was a small insurance policy. Nothing life-changing, just enough that my father wanted to make sure I had support for college or living expenses if things ever got unstable. It was placed into a restricted account that I would fully access at 25. My mother had been upset but accepted it. Daniel had been furious. Detective Long tilted his head, inviting me to continue. He believed it should have gone to him. He told me once that I did not need money because I had always been the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble. He said he was the one supporting Mom, the one who should have inherited everything. He saw the money as proof that my father valued me more. I paused, hearing Daniel's voice echoing in my memory. You think you deserve everything just because you look weak. People like you get handed what people like me have to fight for. Detective Long asked, "Did Daniel ever express resentment after you accessed the account?" Yes. It was subtle at first. He joked about me paying for dinners or covering his bills because I was the lucky one. He said it so lightly that even I laughed sometimes, but beneath the humor was something sharper. Then, when I used some of that money toward my master's program, he told Mom I was wasting what Dad intended. The resentment grew. I could feel it even when he smiled at me. I just did not want to believe it. Detective Long leaned forward slightly. Olivia, resentment like that does not stay small. Combined with the entitlement he developed after your father passed and your mother consistently reinforcing his importance, it can create a dangerous dynamic. A dynamic where he feels justified hurting you. I stared at my hands, remembering moments that now felt like warnings. The way he shoved me against a wall a few years ago while laughing that I should thank him for toughening me up. The way he once said, half serious, half taunting, that the only reason people liked me at work was because I played the fragile card. The way he watched me when he thought I was not looking, not with affection, but with calculation. I whispered, he wanted control. Detective Long nodded. Control is a common motive in cases like this. But more specifically, Daniel appears to resent your independence. You have a career stability autonomy. These things contradict the identity he built for himself as the protector and the one in charge. When you stepped out of that dynamic even slightly, his control weakened. People who rely on power imbalances often react with hostility when those imbalances shift. A lump formed in my throat. So hurting me made him feel stronger. Or affirmed the role he felt he deserved, Detective Long said gently. If he could keep you physically vulnerable or emotionally dependent, he could maintain the hierarchy he believed was natural. And because your mother reinforced his importance and downplayed your suffering, Daniel never experienced consequences. Without consequences, his behavior escalated. I felt something inside me unravel, not in a painful way, but in a freeing one. For the first time, the pattern made sense. Not excusable, but understandable. Detective Long continued. There is another potential element. Your mother's favoritism may have played a significant role. You mentioned she often described you as strong and capable, someone who did not need attention. But Daniel was given praise, reassurance, emotional validation. In family systems like this, siblings who feel overlooked or threatened by the success or resilience of another sibling sometimes lash out to reestablish dominance, especially if they believe the family revolves around them. I nodded slowly. My mother never intended harm, but she created an environment where Daniel could thrive unchecked. Sometimes love has blind spots big enough to swallow people whole, and I had been swallowed for most of my life. Detective Long spoke carefully. Motive does not excuse behavior, but it helps us understand the pattern. Daniel's actions were not sudden or random. They were built over years of entitlement resentment and the belief that he owned the emotional landscape of your family. Hearing it laid out like that made my knees feel weak, even though I was sitting. I whispered, I kept thinking he did not want me dead. And you are right, Detective Long replied. He did not want you dead. He wanted you diminished, dependent, manageable. When I finally met his gaze, there was nothing but calm certainty in his eyes. That is why this investigation matters, because the motive behind abuse is not always rage. Sometimes it is the desire to keep someone small enough that they never leave the shadow that benefits the abuser. A silence settled between us, but it was not the suffocating kind. It felt like a clearing, a truth finally spoken aloud. I exhaled slowly. Thank you for explaining. He stood, offering a reassuring nod. Understanding motive is a key step. The next step is confronting the reality of what happens now. As he walked out, the room felt different, wider, clearer. I finally understood something essential. The danger had never been the cake or the fall. The real danger was the story Daniel had written about me, and the fact that I had believed it. The confrontation was scheduled for Sunday evening, a decision Detective Long explained was strategic because Daniel was less likely to escalate in front of multiple witnesses, especially inside our mother's home, where he enjoyed performing the role of the charismatic older brother. I spent most of the day oscillating between dread and clarity, feeling as though the truth had grown too large to fit back into the quiet spaces I had once forced it into. Aunt Meredith insisted on accompanying me not as a protector, but as a witness. Someone who could stand beside me without rewriting what she saw to preserve a false sense of family harmony. When we pulled up to the familiar house, the porch light flickering slightly as it always had, I felt a tremor run through me. This place had shaped me, and now it was about to be the place where everything changed. Inside the dining room was set as if for a normal family gathering, complete with candles my mother loved, and her insistence on acting like nothing was wrong. She greeted me with a tight smile, her eyes darting nervously to the hallway, as though hoping none of the neighbors would notice detectives arriving at her door. "Olivia, please behave yourself tonight," she whispered sharply. "We just need to clear the air." Before I could respond, Daniel walked in from the kitchen wearing a sweater that made him look almost wholesome, the kind of man people would trust at first glance. His eyes met mine, and he smiled a thin, mocking curve that felt like a secret message. I knew then he believed he had already won, that this meeting was just another chance to narrate the story in his favor. "Hey, Liv," he said casually. "You look better. Guess the cake stunt wasn't so bad after all." My stomach twisted, but before I could speak, 3 firm knocks echoed through the house. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. My mother froze mid-step. Daniel's smile flickered. Aunt Meredith moved closer to me. Detective Long entered with 2 uniformed officers behind him. "Good evening," he said, his tone polite but unwavering. "We need to speak with Daniel Hart regarding an ongoing investigation." My mother sputtered in disbelief. "Investigation? This is absurd. It was a birthday joke." She looked toward Daniel for reassurance, but he avoided her gaze. Detective Long motioned for Daniel to step forward. "Before we proceed, we want to show the family a portion of the evidence collected so there is no misunderstanding." He set a small tablet on the dining table and pressed play. The video from my birthday appeared grainy but unmistakable. Daniel adjusting his stance. Daniel gripping the cake with both hands. Daniel looking behind him to confirm his angle. Daniel swinging with a force far beyond playful intent. The room fell silent except for the faint sound of laughter from the guests in the recording laughter that now sounded cruel and hollow. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. She whispered, "That cannot be right. That is not the whole story." But there was no room for excuses because the truth played on loop, undeniable and raw. Daniel exhaled sharply, his posture stiffening. He tried to laugh. "Seriously, you people are taking this way too far. It was a joke. She is always so dramatic. Ask anyone here." He gestured toward the family as if expecting applause. No one moved. No one defended him, not even our mother. Detective Long opened the folder he carried. "Daniel Hart, based on the evidence collected, including witness statements, medical findings, and digital records, you are being arrested for intentional assault causing bodily harm." Daniel's face darkened, the charismatic mask cracking. He stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward me. "You think you can do this to me? You think you can ruin my life because you cannot handle a joke? For years you have made everything difficult. You think you deserve that money, that education, that attention. You have always thought you were better than me." My mother's voice trembled. "Daniel, stop. Please stop." But he was unraveling too quickly to hear her. He pointed more aggressively. "She was born to take things from me. Dad gave her everything after he died. Mom coddled her. Everyone acted like I was the problem." His words spilled out like poison he had been storing for years. "You were supposed to stay in your place, Olivia. You were supposed to stay small so I could actually matter." A chill swept through the room. Aunt Meredith inhaled sharply, tears forming in her eyes. My mother collapsed into a chair, her face draining of color, as if the truth was finally too loud to mute. Detective Long nodded at the officers. "That is enough." They stepped forward to take Daniel's arms. He resisted, jerking away with a wild look. "Do not touch me. She is lying. They are all lying." But the officers remained steady, closing in with calm precision. Daniel looked around the room, desperately searching for someone to defend him, but for the first time in his life, no one did. Not even the woman who had made excuses for him for decades. When the cuffs clicked into place, his voice broke not into remorse, but rage. "This is your fault, Olivia. You ruined everything the day you were born." The words cut deep, but instead of wounding me, they revealed the truth I needed. His hatred had never grown from something I did. It had lived inside him long before I understood the language of abuse. As they escorted him toward the door, my mother reached out weakly. "Daniel!" But he did not turn around. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the walls of the house. When silence settled again, it felt different. Hollow, but honest. My mother looked at me with eyes full of devastation and something new. Awareness. Meredith placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You did not cause this. You survived it." And for the first time in my life in that house full of ghosts and half-truths, I believed her. In the days following Daniel's arrest, the world seemed to move with an unfamiliar softness, as though the air itself had shifted into a gentler rhythm that my body had never learned to trust. I woke each morning expecting the familiar weight in my chest, the anticipatory bracing for someone else's mood, but instead, there was only space quiet and wide, leaving me unsure of how to breathe in a life where harm was no longer waiting around every corner. The legal process began quickly, and while the word justice often conjures images of dramatic courtroom scenes or heated confrontations, what unfolded instead was quieter, steadier, almost understated in its inevitability. Detective Long kept me updated with a calm professionalism that felt like a lifeline during moments when I questioned whether any of this was truly happening. He explained that based on the evidence, Daniel's legal team had recommended he accept a plea arrangement rather than pursue a trial he could not win. When I asked what that meant in practical terms, he replied that it would include supervised probation, mandatory therapy, and a protective order preventing him from contacting me for several years. At first, the idea of probation instead of prison made me bristle. It felt too light, too gentle for someone who had spent years shaping my world through fear and humiliation. But Detective Long reminded me that justice is not always about the punishment someone receives. Sometimes it is about the boundaries that finally protect the person who has been hurt. It is about the structures put in place to ensure the harm cannot continue, and it is about shifting the balance of power from silence to truth. As the paperwork was finalized, I found myself unexpectedly grateful for a form of justice that did not require reliving every wound in a courtroom or facing Daniel's gaze again. Quiet justice, I realized, can feel like sunlight filtering through clouds after years of shadow. It may not be loud, but it is warm and steady. My mother, however, struggled with the unfolding consequences. In the week after his arrest, she called only once, her voice trembling, like a woman clinging to the frayed edges of a story she no longer believed. She apologized without fully forming the words, circling around sentences as though each one might shatter if she placed too much truth inside it. I heard her inhale sharply before admitting that she had begun seeing a therapist. Not for Daniel, she said, but for herself. For the years she spent choosing peace over honesty. For the times she silenced me to protect an illusion she was afraid to lose. Her vulnerability surprised me. For so long, she had been the gatekeeper of denial, the curator of explanations that kept Daniel untouchable. Hearing her acknowledge her own part in the harm felt surreal, but also necessary. I told her I hoped therapy helped. It was the only honest response I had, and for the first time she accepted honesty rather than resisting it. Meanwhile, Aunt Meredith became a consistent presence, checking in with gentle frequency, but without hovering. She never treated me like I was fragile or broken. Instead, she approached me like someone emerging from a long winter in need of warmth and steadiness, but fully capable of growing again. She helped me navigate practical decisions like securing new locks on my apartment and updating my emergency contacts at work. She also sat with me through the silence that came after the adrenaline faded, reminding me that healing is not linear and that grief can arise even when the person you are grieving is someone who hurt you. Returning to work at the hospital felt both grounding and disorienting. The familiar hum of the building, the soft clatter of equipment, the steady rhythm of patient care reminded me that life had continued even while mine had fractured and rebuilt itself. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, but they did not pry. Some offered supportive smiles or quick hugs gestures that felt like small anchors. The hospital's counseling department reached out offering supportive resources, and for the first time in my life, I accepted help without feeling weak for doing so. In the midst of rebuilding my sense of safety, I also moved out of my old apartment and into a small unit closer to work. It was nothing extravagant, but the space felt like mine in a way no place ever had before. I painted the walls warm colors, added soft lamps instead of harsh lights, and placed books on the shelves in a way that made the room feel lived in rather than temporary. Creating a home free from Daniel's shadow became an act of quiet rebellion, a declaration that I would no longer live waiting for the next blow masked as humor. The protective order also shifted something fundamental inside me. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, Daniel could not reach me. He could not call. He could not show up unannounced. He could not loom in the corner of my life like a storm cloud waiting to break. I slept through the night for the first time in months. My shoulders relaxed. I even laughed freely without the instinctive need to glance over my shoulder and gauge whether someone disapproved. As the weeks passed, the world did not change dramatically, but I did. I learned to differentiate peace from silence. Silence had been the absence of conflict, a fragile quiet held together by fear. Peace was something else entirely. Peace was waking without dread. Peace was choosing my own clothing without worrying whether Daniel would mock me. Peace was hearing my own voice as something worth listening to. One afternoon, as I walked home from work, the sun setting behind the mountains, I realized I no longer felt small. The story I had once believed about myself, the one Daniel wrote through years of manipulation, was finally unraveling. I was no longer the girl who swallowed pain until it became another organ. I was no longer the woman who explained bruises as clumsiness because the alternative was too heavy to face. Justice had arrived not with sirens or headlines, but with boundaries, truth, and the quiet rebuilding of a life that finally belonged to me. And as I unlocked the door to my new apartment, the last light of the day warming the hallway, I understood something profound. Survival had kept me alive. Justice was teaching me how to live. Healing did not arrive as a single moment of clarity or a dramatic turning point. It came in small waves, subtle shifts that at first felt too gentle to count as progress. In the weeks after the protective order was finalized, my life settled into a rhythm that felt foreign but quietly miraculous. I began each morning not with dread, but with a slow breath, the kind that expands the chest without pain. I would open the curtains in my new apartment and let the Denver sunlight spill across the floor, watching it stretch like a promise. I had never realized how much light I had learned to live without until it began returning. My therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Harper, helped me understand that healing from long-term familial abuse was not about erasing the past, but about reclaiming the parts of myself I had been taught to abandon. She told me it was normal to mourn even harmful relationships because the grief was not for the person who hurt me, but for the version of myself who endured it. Some sessions were heavy, filled with tears I had swallowed for years. Others were quiet, reflective, filled with the startling realization that I was beginning to trust my own instincts again. One afternoon, she asked me when I first learned to doubt myself. The answer came easily. Sometime in childhood, I said. Maybe the first time Daniel pushed me and told me I was too sensitive. Maybe the first time my mother laughed instead of helping. And when she asked me when I first believed I deserved better, I whispered, today. It was the truth. Healing also meant acknowledging the parts of my life that had stayed strong despite everything. My job at the hospital had always grounded me even when my personal life felt unsteady. Returning to work fully reminded me that competence and compassion could coexist without being overshadowed by someone else's cruelty. I threw myself into projects I had once felt too exhausted to consider taking on new responsibilities and even mentoring a few younger employees. Their trust in me helped rebuild the trust I was learning to place in myself. Outside of work, I slowly rebuilt a community. Not a large one, but a steady one. Aunt Meredith became a constant presence, offering warmth without pity, support without smothering. She brought over meals during busy weeks and joined me for walks around the neighborhood. Sometimes she simply sat with me in silence, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, letting me exist without expectation. I also formed connections with people who understood trauma not through theory, but through experience. I discovered a support group at the hospital that met every Thursday evening, a circle of individuals who carried their stories with a level of honesty that felt like oxygen. The first time I shared my story, my voice trembled, but no one turned away. No one called me dramatic. No one minimized what I had lived through. Instead, they listened with a gravity that felt like a balm on wounds I still carried. Being believed became one of the most powerful steps in my healing. Inspired by a growing sense of purpose, I began working with the hospital's outreach team to create a resource program for young adults experiencing familial neglect or emotional abuse. We called it the Lantern Project because its mission was simple: to shine light into places where silence had allowed harm to grow. Designing the program became a kind of emotional reconstruction. For every resource I helped build, I imagined how it might have changed my life at 13, at 17, at 25. For every workshop we planned, I pictured a younger version of myself sitting quietly in the back row, finally seeing a path forward. As I poured myself into service, something inside me softened, but also strengthened. I no longer felt like a shadow in my own life. I no longer traced every decision back to how Daniel might react or how my mother might spin the narrative. I was no longer a receptacle for someone else's pain. I was choosing my own shape for the first time. My mother reached out intermittently, her messages cautious and uneven. She was still in therapy, still unraveling decades of denial and misplaced loyalty. Our conversations were tentative, marked by long pauses and emotional landmines, but I no longer felt responsible for protecting her from the truth. She apologized more openly, now acknowledging that she had failed to see what was in front of her. She asked if forgiveness was possible. I told her forgiveness was a path, not a verdict, and I was willing to walk it slowly. In moments of quiet, I reflected on the many versions of myself I had inhabited over the years. The child who stared at the ceiling, wishing someone would help her. The teenager who pretended to laugh at jokes that stung. The young woman who learned to hide bruises behind long sleeves and longer excuses. The adult who drove herself to the ER because she feared no one else would believe her. Each version had carried the weight of survival. Now it was time to carry the weight of becoming. One evening, months after the confrontation, I visited a small art shop a few blocks from my apartment. I found myself drawn to a simple painting of mountains at sunrise. The colors were soft, muted purples and golds, but the ridges were sharp, strong, real. It reminded me of Denver mornings and the steady rise of something new. I bought it without hesitation and hung it above my bed. Every morning when I wake, it is the first thing I see, a reminder that rebirth is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just the slow return of light. As the year came to a close, I realized I no longer felt afraid of the future. I no longer measured my worth by how little space I took up or how well I avoided conflict. Instead, I measured it by the way my chest felt when I took a deep breath, by the steady rhythm of my footsteps on the walk to work, by the simple knowledge that my life finally belonged to me. The X-ray did not just reveal a fracture. It revealed the truth my family refused to see. It revealed the strength I had carried all along, and it revealed the beginning of a life where I am no longer small, no longer silent, no longer shrinking to survive. If you have ever been told your pain was just a joke, or your voice was too loud, or your truth was an inconvenience, tell your story below. You are not alone, and you never were. If you are still here with me, I want you to take a moment and breathe, because stories like this are not just entertainment. They are mirrors. They reflect the lives of so many people who were told to laugh off humiliation, who were told their bruises were clumsiness, who were told their instincts were overreactions. If anything in my journey reminded you of your own, please know this is a space where your voice matters. Drop your story in the comments, even if it is just one sentence, because speaking the truth is often the first step toward reclaiming the parts of yourself that someone tried to shrink. And if you are watching this quietly unsure whether your experience counts as harm, let me tell you something no one ever told me. Pain is real, even when the people causing it insist it is not. Your body remembers. Your heart remembers. You deserve safety. You deserve clarity. You deserve to wake up without fear humming beneath your ribs. If you want more stories that shine a light on toxic family dynamics, on survival, on justice, that arrives not with grand gestures but with quiet boundaries, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next story, especially if you have ever been labeled too sensitive or too dramatic just for asking to be treated with dignity. Your presence here helps us build a community where silence is no longer the rule, where people recognize the difference between peace and appeasement, where no one has to explain away their wounds to make others comfortable. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, someone who has been walking around carrying a truth that feels too heavy to hold alone, share this video with them. Sometimes one story can be the spark that helps someone see their situation clearly for the first time. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for allowing this space to exist. Healing is not linear, justice is not always loud, and starting over is not a weakness. It is a declaration. And if you ever forget that, come back to this story as a reminder that you are not alone, not invisible, and never beyond the possibility of something better. Now tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your voice belongs here.